Good morning and welcome, Gaby. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Dan. How are you?
I'm very well. So it's always good for the podcast host to interview the podcast host.
Yeah.
How do you feel about being on the? I know you've done lots of these, but how do you feel about being on the other side of things?
It's nice to not have to think about all the questions for once and what comes next.
That's
So
true.
I'm gonna take it easy breezy.
That's true. I was on someone else's podcast the other week. It does feel a bit odd. I was just about to ask them a question. I forgot that I've got to listen to theirs. But so we're going to talk about a few things, not least the fantastic event that you got coming up in the autumn, Twenties Fest. But for those that aren't aware, there might be a few people in my network. I'd be a surprise because you put yourself out there and the brand out there, so I'm sure lots of people have heard about it. But for those that aren't aware, just want to sort of start with your background, talk about the idea behind the business. But to start off with, I've looked up every sort of definition of an entrepreneur, and definitely you sort of tick all those boxes. I'm keen to understand where you think that sort of fire in your belly, the ambition to start your own business came from. I don't know whether you can take us back to, whether it was at school when you were selling things and you were setting up sort of businesses where you were talking to your friends about it, or whether it's for your family or friends. Just give us a flavour of where you think that came from.
I definitely think I'm an accidental entrepreneur, as in I thought there was a really good idea and a gap in the market. And only then did I really consider entrepreneurship. I didn't really kind of come up with loads of business plans, as you would do, over a drink with friends and stuff like that. Of course, everyone kind of thinks, oh, that would be a great business. But I don't think I ever really took it seriously until I had this idea. And then I became kind of absolutely obsessed with it and thinking, there is a huge gap in the market. Why is no one filling this? And I think there was a number of reasons why no one was filling it, as in I have a teaching background. So my degree is in education, and then I went into teaching for 2 years. And then I didn't love my experience of teaching. It definitely wasn't what I wanted to do long term. And I realized I had a bit of a business head on my shoulders. But when I thought business head, I thought work for someone else in a business, not for myself. And then I moved into the events industry. Now, a lot of people accidentally fall into the events industry. I'm sure you get
pretty much everyone
on your podcast. That say that. Although there are like event management degrees nowadays,
True.
but I wasn't one of the people that did that. And so I kind of wanted to use my skill set and the skills I had in teaching very nicely led into a career in exhibitions and award ceremonies. And I managed to work my way up in that. And then I was like, the two of these just would go so perfectly together in an event that's all about, this weird, really crazy part of our life that's all about having a bit of a quarter life crisis. What am I doing now that I've been through school education? How do I figure out adult life? And the kind of the next steps to that. And then also the event side of things. So I think it's just my experience led me to that. But my parents aren't entrepreneurial. I've just always worked for myself. What was not work for myself, work for someone else from the age of like 13 when I got my first paper round. So I'm a hard worker, but it wasn't until I had this idea that I thought, I'm going to be an entrepreneur.
Interesting, because you do read lots of stories where people think, school was never for me. I only wanted to leave school and make money, and I wasn't too fussed about an idea. I'll just buy and sell things. People do it now, right? And actually, you could argue it's ever more easy to do so than maybe 30, 40 years ago, because there's Shopify. You can set up a shop online quickly. You can buy and sell stuff quickly. I'm not saying you couldn't do it before, maybe just, in a different way. So it's interesting that you didn't have that intention, but you had an idea which led to your sort of desire to fulfill that, which is an interesting way round and sort of the journey. Thank you. So Talk Twenties, and you just sort of referenced it there in terms of the idea. Again, for those that aren't aware, just if you can just bring that to life. You've already sort of mentioned when the idea happened, but sort of how it manifested itself. Because listen, lots of us have lots of ideas. We have lots of hobbies. We're interested in certain things. And actually, some people would, warn you against trying to, fuel that into running a business, which has got a whole different set of connotations with it, which we'll talk about. But when was that moment that we thought, and talk to me about the idea where you thought, actually, this is something I can make into a career, if you like?
Well, the idea initially began when I was teaching in a secondary school. So I did an education degree that wasn't training how to be a teacher. It was more like sociology, psychology, history of education, how we like culturally learn as humans. And it was super interesting. I loved my degree, but nearly everyone else in my degree went off to be teachers. And I was like on the fence about teaching. It wasn't what I saw myself doing long term, but I was like, well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next. And the skills that I'd learned doing teaching would be great, for the rest of adult life. So I stepped into teaching, and in my second year, I was given a form of sixth form students. So you can imagine me, I'm
That's
like
a baptism
21,
of fire.
22. Yeah. Really young
Yeah.
to have a group of be responsible for 17, 18-year-olds. But it put me in a really unique position, because obviously they would ask me questions that they maybe wouldn't ask, my older counterparts, things about kind of what's it been like to go through university, how to move out for the first time, what's the difference between a credit card and a debit card. One of them asked me, all of those kinds of questions that you feel silly for asking, but you don't maybe feel silly for asking someone who's, just, 3-4 years older. And it just started to kind of stimulate an idea in my head that I was like, we're just not taught this stuff in school. And actually, if we were taught about things like mortgages or even, mental health to a certain degree, it's not until you're really faced with those challenges that you really even care.
Sure.
I didn't care about mortgages when I was in school, but when I wanted to buy my house, I absolutely did. But where do I go for that advice where I could feel like I was in a supportive community? Couldn't really go anywhere. So it was only when I started to kind of get those questions that I thought there's definitely like more that can be done here. And I wasn't loving the whole teaching experience, like I said. So quickly I kind of realized that, I wanted to use my skill set in a different way. So after 2 years, I stepped into working in events. I worked for a company that ran kind of like employer events it was called STEM Women, and it was a meet of events. They'd get graduates and students from all different universities. They'd locate themselves in one of the cities, and they'd invite students from all over to hear amazing talks about women in STEM. And then that kind of stimulated the idea from back in school. I was like, well, if we can do this for STEM and it works that way, we can do this for life skills. We can do this in a way. And it did feel quite corporate. It was a lot of corporate companies coming. Obviously, they want to employ people. So it felt a lot like a careers fair. But I was like, there definitely has to exist. There definitely has to be something that exists that is way more fun, but people can still take away learnings from. And then that's when the initial seed. And I can remember driving to one of those events for STEM Women. And it was a long drive, like a 2-hour drive. And I don't know if you ever get in your head when you do long drives, but I do. And I had literally dreamt up this whole idea. And we're talking like 5 years ago now. And I could just so visually see how it would look. I didn't know how on earth I'd get there. Like I had no clue. But I was like, this needs to exist. And at the time, I started doing a little bit of blogging myself, just about my own experience. Back in the days when people used to like blog and stuff, used to write all those things. It's not cool anymore. But I was doing that myself under like an alias. Like I wasn't, because I'd obviously had a teaching background. I couldn't really put myself out there. So I kind of had that. And that was kind of reaffirming the stuff that, everyone in their 20s was feeling this way. And I'm sure a lot of people think back to their 20s and stuff like that, like, I wish I'd had something like this, because I felt all of these things in my 20s. So then I moved into another role where I was working at exhibitions and trade shows for Rapid News Group, managing their trade shows, MedTech, Innovation, TCT, Interplast, and then their award ceremonies on the side. So I got some really good experience in kind of running live events. And this idea was just still going and still going and still going. And then I decided I was going to launch in January 2020.
Good timing.
So for anyone who can think back to January 2020, you'll probably know that by March 2020, that idea that I'd been dreaming up for probably close to 2 years at that point, just couldn't do. And I was like, at first I was obviously like a bit bummed out. I was like, this is like really, I thought about this for such a long time. I've wasted so much brain space on it. And then I was like, there has to be a way that I can still do this and kind of build momentum for it. And, we all thought it was going to be like 2 months and then we'll be like, whoa, we can go out again. There has to be another way. So I launched a podcast, and, Dan, from having one of your own, that like podcasts have absolutely boomed within this time. And I think I just got into podcasting, at the right time. A lot of people say that entrepreneurialism is a lot to do with luck and timing, as it is to do with, whether you're like good in business and everything else and have all the business acumen and stuff like that. And I think I just got into podcasting at the right time. We moved up to a professional podcast studio where it was recorded in person quite early on after lockdown restrictions. came about. So we were one of the first like indie podcasts to start stepping into that and investing in that, which kind of made people even more interested in wanting to come on the show with bigger profiles, and it just kind of grew and grew from there. So we've now built this existing audience of like 70,000 across
Amazing.
all of our different platforms of young people, and like 120,000 young people that have tuned into the podcast at some stage, whether they follow us or not, which is obviously some amazing numbers. But this idea of running an event for these young people hasn't gone away, and I've still got that initial drive to want to do that. So I guess that's the backstory.
So it's interesting, and we spoke about this sort of when we first had our chat, because I ridiculously, looking back, launched a show for the over 50s community, even though I was 40 at the time. And one of the things I found after I did it is that it's quite hard to define what a community linked together by age wants, right? So in my case, people over 50, between 50 and 100, even harder. In your case, I guess, a decade, if it's 20s. Just before we get onto the event, just generally, how do you decide what's relevant for what individual? Or is it the community telling you what they want to hear about? Just talk to me about engaging with the community and coming up with content that's right for them.
Definitely. So we're obviously called Talk Twenties, but there's elements that are relevant at younger ages and older ages, and we never say that don't listen to our content if you're not in your 20s. Like, obviously not. We know it's helpful for other people, but I think what we really define ourselves is as like a feeling, that feeling of kind of not really knowing where you're heading, not really feeling like you've got the tools or the knowledge equipped to kind of do that, and just feeling a little bit lost. It's more of a feeling that we describe ourselves, but it's really hard to create a whole community around a feeling. So it's easier to say like this is most common in our 20s, these kind of feelings that we have, and then building a community off like a shared problem that we're all trying to solve. We're all trying to feel a little bit better about the direction that we're heading in, or we're all facing challenges between relationships, finances, all of those kind of things. It's all shared problems, and it just kind of feels like when you step out of your last bit of education, whether that's school, university, or whatever, you do kind of feel a bit like, well, here's adult life, and what's next, and who do I go to for support? And so that's where it comes from. It's like a unique bonding feeling that we try and say. So like our tagline on our like bios, you'll see is like, let's stop pretending we've got it all figured out, because none of us do. So like that's how we kind of like pull the community together. And I think, we are kind of what it says on the tin, really, which is nice because it's very easy to define. But we don't discriminate. We're not ageist at the same time.
Sure. Listen, lots of the issues and problems that you mentioned, as you say, are lifelong problems. I'm in my late 40s. I still experience some of those things that you suggested. So it's interesting. And I guess also now we are blessed with tools, technology specifically, that allows us to build insights through data with the communities that we serve. So I guess, you came up with an idea. It was your vision based on what I guess you thought and what maybe some of your circle of influence thought. But as it's got bigger, give me a view of how you've managed to speak to that community, leverage some of the insights that they've given you, and then how maybe you've put that into practice. Let us specifically maybe around the podcast start off with, and we'll get into the event.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a lot of market research between our audience. So we've run like questionnaires in the past to kind of understand what the challenges young people are facing. And we've done this a couple of times now, most recently for our pre-reg for Twenties Fest, to kind of understand the challenges they're facing at this moment in time, and therefore what sessions we should be putting on at Twenties Fest for them to kind of engage in. So I think the numbers are like 60% of young people have felt a loss of direction within the past year. 54% of young people have struggled with their mental health within the past year. Some crazy stats like that have been coming out of the research that is then informing our content as we go forwards, not least in our podcast, but also in obviously the live events that we hope to do. So we're really like in tune with our audience. And plus, whenever there's something that is kind of going on in the world that's a really hot topic, perhaps in the news or trending, we either talk about this through our Talk 20s to Me newsletter, or we put it through our Instagram stories as well, which is another way of having that back and forth between our audience. And it's just a matter of they're just flicking through on Instagram, but they're telling us, you know, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that. And we use those things and those data to then inform the content that we put out there. So it's a two-way conversation.
Yep.
And I think some platforms are better geared up to do that than others. Some platforms just feel like, especially podcasting, actually, I think, I don't know how you feel about this, Dan, but sometimes it feels like shouting into the abyss, and you don't really have like a two-way conversation with your listeners. More so on YouTube, because there's opportunities to like leave comments and stuff. So that really helps inform our content, which is great. But it's slightly harder on the likes of like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Spotify have recently implemented polls that you can kind of do to answer questions in Q&A, which I think is great. And we've started to get some feedback through from those things, which is brilliant, because someone's not just listening to it in a car or on their train ride or whatever it is, and then, well, some of them are obviously, and they're not kind of giving feedback. We're getting that kind of conversation, which I think is so needed in podcasting. So in whatever way we can talk to our community, we're trying our best to.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because lots of, again, these days with the tools we got at our disposal, people are happy to share feedback. I mean, that's a two-way street, right? I think, I see lots of people of all ages putting themselves out there on whatever platform it is. It is a two-way street. There is a personal cost of sometimes doing that, because you put yourself out there and then you can be shot down for your views. Certain platforms are very toxic, shall we say. So
not naming names, Twitter.
We can name names. Yeah, Twitter. I mean, literally every day. And you find yourself getting caught up in it. Right, even if you don't have that personality.
I think TikTok can be like that. TikTok can be a little bit like that as well, I think, in certain videos and stuff like that. So
and just, I've been thinking about this question. I know it's a hard one for you to answer, because you're in the age group you're in. But do you think younger people, shall we say, it's harder for them these days, if you like, than maybe it was 30 years ago? I know it's a massive question, but I read a lot about it, right? And it depends on who's saying it and why they're saying it. Part of me personally feels that it's easier because they got all these tools at their disposal, right? But it's harder because they got all these tools at their disposal.
Exactly. I would say exactly that. I think what young people need right now is an immense amount of discipline.
Yeah.
There are so many ways that you can get distracted. There are so many ways that you can be taken off on a different path, because there is potentially too much out there. And kind of things that they can use. And then sometimes it's hard to decide, which one is decision making as well, because you have so many options. Maybe things were a little bit simpler when you have, less choice. I think that there's loads of studies that kind of say that decision making is easier when you've got a choice between this and this, or no choice at all. But if you've got a choice of 100, you might spend a lot longer making those decisions. And so that makes things like a little bit more difficult, I think, in those kinds of ways. But at the same time, if you make the right decision, or you know which direction you're heading in, then things can be easier at the same time.
And I guess lots of stories out there, lots of podcasts, people doing this, doing that, making their millions and living their dream. And again, that could be challenging for people, because I think it ends up putting pressure on an individual that's listening to it or reading it, right? And thinking, God, time's ticking. I should be. I'm 21 or 24 or 25. I haven't done this. I haven't got a family. I haven't made this. Like, is that the sort of feedback as well people give you? Like, they feel
100%
not worthy. They haven't done enough in their life, and they're only like of a certain age.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's a challenge for us, because the guests that we get on our podcast are either experts in a certain specific area or celebrities. So they have some kind of profile. They're seen as like people that most young people would look up to, because that's what gets them to listen to the conversation in the first place. But one of the things that we ask every single guest, no matter, their background, we always ask them one question that we think helps solve what you're trying to say. And that is like, it's really amazing that you're an expert in XYZ, or it's really amazing that you've managed to, create this life for yourself, and, you're well known and stuff like that. But if we were to ask you that, if we were to say that, like, we know from speaking to so many people on the podcast that nobody has it all figured out and everyone is struggling with something at this moment in time, can you share with us and the listeners what that one thing is that you are perhaps struggling with right now and you are trying to overcome and get better at? And that just really levels the playing field, because they start to go, well, actually, but I'm struggling in this. So even if they've done a 20-minute spiel about, their expertise in finance, they might turn around and be like, but honestly, my love life
Yeah.
is horrific. I can't,
Yeah.
you know, I can't get into a relationship or this and this and this. And they'll share a whole different side to them that maybe people think, well, actually, my love life's all right. So
Yeah.
it's, you know, it just levels the playing field, and it makes us all seem that, like, yes, we might be getting these people onto the podcast because they've got a level of expertise, but actually, no one is the finished
Yeah.
product. We've all working through something.
That's really important. So they show their vulnerability. And I guess you then feel
Yeah.
that it's quite a big responsibility you've now got, right? You know, you've got thousands of
Mm-hmm.
people listening and potentially coming to this event.
Mm-hmm.
Um, talk to me about how you feel about that, because every day you're now responsible for all those people that are, well, you're not personally responsible, but you know what I mean? Do you feel a sense of responsibility for the content that you're putting out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
100% feel the responsibility. And I think it's crazy. Like, I always, a lot of past guests on the podcast have become friends,
Sure.
and, you know, our community is so amazing, but a lot of them, like, then disclose a lot of information, like maybe off
Yeah.
air, that, you know, they really do come to us fast because they don't feel like they've maybe got this support or can be
Sure.
that vulnerable in other spaces. So, like, my WhatsApp DMs are, like, you know, people being extremely vulnerable
Yeah.
with me, and it's nice because I think all of us would want to be more open. And it's sometimes even like the guys who you would probably expect for them to, you know, everything's fine, you know, that's kind of like more of their approach, but they're like, nah, I'm not feeling too great, or this
Yeah.
has happened,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and able to be so much more vulnerable with us. And I think as a generation, and even like beyond as a society, I think we are really craving like vulnerable conversations, because it's really, no one really wants to say, oh, this is this perfect human, how do I aspire
Yeah.
to be like them? I think we all want to see a little bit of like, okay, they're human too, sort of thing.
Yeah. No, and I definitely see it. Definitely the podcasts that I listen to and things that I watch. You know, I'm from a different generation, if you like. And my generation still, I guess, find it a bit different, especially men of my age. You know, I have conversations with my
Mm-hmm.
friends. It's still a little bit awkward, but it's happening. Definitely
Mm-hmm.
happening more. You know, we're definitely
Yeah.
talking about things that we possibly wouldn't have spoken about previously, which
It's
is
good.
good. But it does come. I'm interested to hear about the responsibility that you feel that you've got. So you've built this community. You currently serve it, or you served it with a podcast, and then you
Mm-hmm.
came up, or you had this idea originally, the burning idea, which was still there, to deliver an event.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us about the plans for that, where you're at with it,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of things people are going to do, and just give us a view of Twenties Fest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we wanted to do this for a very long time, and we essentially in year one want to prove the concept works, and we think it will, because obviously
Yeah,
all the data that we've got from our wait list, and all the kind of conversations that we're having. But yeah, it needs to exist. And I think what's really nice to see is that we aren't the first podcast community
yeah,
to launch an event of this kind. There's another event that happened back in May called Postcards from Midlife, which
saw that.
again is a really popular podcast. And then they've turned it into an event, and I think that happened at the
Yes, it did. Yeah,
BBC in London. So I think this goes to show that, like, this whole community podcast then driven event, it has its
yeah,
place. It was apparently a really very, very successful event. So essentially we're going down the same route, but we're launching it in a way that we feel will appeal to, you know, Gen Z and the next generation. So we're launching it. We're based in Liverpool. That's where we record our podcast. That's where our offices are, the businesses. So we're launching in Liverpool, and it's an amazing venue, very popular venue in Liverpool, called Camp and Furnace. It's essentially two warehouses next to each other that's connected by a lobby bar kind of area, and 3 built-in stages already existing there. So it's essentially for the event organizer out
yeah,
there, much more of a plug and play for us for year one, especially for us when we did apply for government funding and loads of different schemes, and unfortunately we didn't get it.
right.
Like, there's lots of competition in these kinds of things, and we hoped we would. We got really great feedback, but feedback doesn't do anything without the money. So thanks for saying that it's a great idea, but yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
money would have been
yeah,
great. So for us, it was like, okay, well, again, we still want to go ahead with this. Much like when I started the podcast, I still want to go ahead with this. We want to prove the concept works, and then hopefully it will, be an absolute smash. And then from year on after that we can continue to do it. So our view is to launch Twenties Fest in Liverpool, where the business was born essentially. And then in year 2, our plans are to do a Twenties Fest North and a Twenties Fest South.
Okay.
The idea for the event that it sits around a freshers kind of time. So when everyone's thinking about that back to school kind of time, but you're a graduate, but you kind of get that kind of back to school energy for a few years when so I think everyone still gets it no matter what age. I'm still getting it at 28. But, you know, we're kind of doing it in that October sort of time. So people are starting to feel like, okay, well, you know, what am I going to do this year? And so, yeah, that's the plan, to launch in Liverpool and then the following years to do North and South. And yeah, the venue is amazing. It's used for all different kinds of events. And yeah, they've been brilliant in kind of working with us. And then we've had some really great pre-reg data. Tickets will hopefully go on sale. Are going on sale next week.
Cool.
We're partnering with universities. We're partnering with universities to kind of help their graduates, like local graduates, know about the event and attend. So yeah, and then we're speaking to lots of different brands about having really cool brand activations at the event. So things that people want to engage in. So less pop-up stands with a, you know, banner and come and chat to me, like careers fair vibes, much more like mini golf, photo booths, you know, basketball we've got going on with one of our partners. And so yeah, it feels like a full day out. And then obviously we've got the streams of kind of content across the stages. So we're pulling out the most popular topics from the feedback that we've got from our pre-reg form and inviting in specialists within that for panel sessions. We've got some headline speakers that we're in conversations with across the 2 different stages. And then to keep everyone happy and, you know, good vibes and all of that, we're going to have a little bit of like live music and
cool.
some artists on our stage as well. So it's a lot going on. It should feel like a day when you can experience lots of different things, go into the sessions that appeal to you, play games in the other times and stuff like that. But yeah, hopefully a really amazing event.
Fantastic. Great to hear. So it's a mixture of obviously content, as you say, activations, entertainment with some music as well. And in terms of the brands that you've been speaking to, I don't know if you can name names or not, but again, always interested. You know, we come up with ideas and we obviously have to commercialize them. So sometimes we get steered by the people that are investing, and there's always sort of a balance between getting dragged in one direction. How have you found that? How have you found the sort of response from some of the brands? Have you found that, you know, sounds good, but not interested in investing, or actually this is brilliant, I want to do something? Is it a mixed bag? Give us a view of how you've...
I'd say the funniest comment we get is like, yeah, but I don't know how we'd be fun. Like a lot of brands are like, we're not fun. And I'm like, are you joking? Like there's so many, I think people really struggle to like think outside of the box for ideas. So of the brands that like really want to get involved, it's a lot of like us coming up with much more of the concepts of like, well, you want to promote this, so how would this work? And we're really having to be inventive with like what's possible, because a lot of brands kind of go, oh, I don't know how we'd kind of do that. But then when you present them with a few ideas, they're like, wow, that sounds amazing. That's really cool. So I think because it's a concept that hasn't really existed before, there is no formula or blueprint. So we're having to prompt the ideas for a brand to then go, actually, that would be really good. Let's get involved that kind of way. And obviously in year 1, the conversation is going to be so much harder because we have no photography, we have no videography of the event. It hasn't existed before. So we are obviously, the conversations are you know, harder than they will be hopefully next year. But at the same time, everyone understands the need for an event like this. And especially for brands wanting to raise brand awareness or create content or reach their target audience, give out samples and stuff, it really is a fantastic opportunity for them.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But as you say, you know, it's easier sometimes for them to understand how to buy a 3x5 shell scheme stand or a space only stand, or but as you say, hopefully once you get the first one off the ground and you've got proof of concept and they can actually visualize it, then it'd be easier for them to buy into it. I just want to sort of the end part of our conversation, Gaby. I want to talk about how it is for you, sort of a day to day, the challenges of running a small business. Talk to me about some of the major sort of hurdles on maybe a daily, weekly basis that you overcome. Maybe it's things you haven't had to do before, you've got no experience of. How do you deal with that?
Every day is hard. Every day is hard, but every day is great at the same time. It's a really hard thing to kind of describe because you have so many like amazing, incredible moments, but there are also so many moments that feel really tough and really difficult, and like, I haven't got the capacity to take this. But you do another day, you get through the next day, and something amazing happens. Like, it really does feel like a roller coaster. The highs are high and then the lows feel really low. I think it's because so much is on the line. You know, I've given up and sacrificed a lot for this company, and for, you know, I do feel like I'm really proud of even where we've got to right now. But I do feel like, you know, there's more. We've got way more in the tank to continue going, and so many more ideas that we can do. So yeah, there are some really difficult days, you know, things when, you know, cash flow, that's always like a bummer, with the finances side of things, and just having to kind of do all of those things. And then just like, you know, natural problems that kind of occur regularly with business owners. And yeah, it's just, it's a new challenge every single day. And I think it's turning me into quite, I hope, quite a well-rounded person. Like, I feel like I've had experience in all different areas, you know, from, you know, managing a team to figure out finances, to having a, you know, a profile publicly. And, you know, there's so many different angles and things that I've kind of developed, that I feel like I'm on this really like fast, like accelerator course to try and understand business, but I'm just doing it myself. Like, I'm not on any kind of program. I'm just kind of figuring it out. And I think the other thing that I've done is surround myself with really great mentors. So I have a fantastic network that are really supportive. So if I do come across, you know, a challenge that feels like, you know, I don't really know what my next steps are, I probably have 2 or 3 people in my network that I could go to and say, I'm struggling with this. What would you advise? So
support structure is really important, right? And I guess having not feeling afraid to ask the right question, or ask a question of somebody that maybe has got experience in a certain area. You know, it's not an admission of defeat or failure. It's just understanding that we all need support as we go along. Would you sort of agree with that?
And and I think my company lends itself to that kind of thing anyway. We're all about figuring it all out. So it doesn't feel weird when I then ask someone to help me figure it out, because that's literally the whole ethos of what we talk about. So for me, I think, you know, it's very helpful in that degree.
Is there a sort of personal cost of you sort of putting yourself out there? You know, I see you on socials, you're very open about what you're doing. There's definitely a blurring, I guess, between personal and private life. I guess it's just life now, right?
The 100%.
The two are. So talk to me about that. You know, do you feel that? Is that something that concerns you going forward?
I think it definitely does. We try and make the podcast as much about the guests, more about the guests than it is about me. I'm just the common thread that threads between all of the conversations. But yeah, I definitely there's a lot of stuff that, you know, are private about my own life, but then most of my life is spent building this business. So at the same time, there isn't much else to be able to talk about. So yeah, like I think personal cost, I would say the biggest at this moment in time is more just like taking minimal out from the business, because you just want to push it forward and for growth. So you want to bring in new team members, stuff like that, which means, you know, a lot of people look at entrepreneurs and think you must absolutely be rolling in it. And realistically, not the case. Not the case. If I wanted to have more money, I would go and get what I like to call a real job or a proper job. Not because the business isn't doing well, more because we're reinvesting in our talent, in improving the business and all of those kind of things. So I think that's like the biggest challenge.
Enjoying it?
Love it.
No, because it's important, because it can get stunted. You do something that you love, and as you say, you've got to deal with cash flow, spreadsheets, P&L, hiring staff who don't always work out with the best intentions. Got to have tough conversations with individuals that you like, you know, that maybe are friends. And so it's sort of like every time that happens, sometimes a little bit of water goes out on that fire of passion. But then, as you say, something at a moment happens, which I guess sort of reignites it. So it's.
Yeah, I have a really good friend who works, her office is literally like pretty much next to mine. She's running a business that is so similar in terms of she helps school girls in marketing. So she helps obviously young people early on in their careers. And because we're in the same place at the same time, it's very easy to, you know, have someone who's in your shoes who gets it. So quite frequently, if we're both having like a tough week, we'll be like, right, let's go for dinner, let's talk it through. And once I've had a conversation with her, I'm usually like, oh, you know, things won't be so bad, we'll figure it out. And that's probably what I need to kind of get me back on track most of the time. So that has really helped, is knowing other people who are in very similar boats.
Sharing our problems and challenges has always been the best solution, I think, over the years. Finally, if someone's watching this, they're sort of like Gaby was 5-6 years ago, got an idea for whatever it might be, what advice would you give them?
I would think try and get as much traction as you possibly can on your idea. If you think there's, you know, going to be an opening for it, like try and get something out there that people can engage with and prove that this is kind of needed in the world. I think that's what we did with the podcast, and it just gave us the confidence to launch something like this. We wouldn't be launching Twenties Fest, I think, without it, to be honest, because this kind of shows that there's a need and a desire. And I think it's a different way of kind of launching events. So yeah, I think get as much feedback, do your market research, and then go from there.
Perfect. Gaby, thank you so much for your time. We wish you the best ongoing success, obviously, with the podcast, and all the very best for the launch of the event.
Thank you.
It's a tough road, but I'm sure it'll be successful if obviously someone like yourself is very passionate about it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.